Welcome to the Invincible Innovation Show, the podcast for changemakers. Each week, I talk to the most fascinating entrepreneurs and innovation leaders about innovation, strategy, and design. Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about how will we connect and thrive in the future. We have a very important and special guest, and I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, Product Innovation and Value Creation Expert, and I'll be your host. And I have a very special guest, Henry. Hi, Henry.
Hi.
So happy that you're here. Henry Coutinho-Mason is the author of the Future Normal book, and he's the co-founder of 3Space. And I read the book, and it's really interesting. So stay with us. We are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start. Tell us about your new book, The Future Normal.
Yeah, thanks. So it was a funny one because I was running a company called Trend Watching before the pandemic, and I stepped back from that just at the start of a pandemic, and I ended up getting in touch with the guy who actually became my co-author, Rohit Bhargava, who I'd known for 7 or 8 years. We wrote about trends online, both of us, and he's published a whole number of books on trends called the Non-Obvious Trend series. And we'd only met for 20 minutes just before the pandemic in October 2019. And we were talking about, at a world where the future seems so uncertain, right? This moment of, coming out of the lockdowns, where was everything going next? And we were laughing over the fact that even before the pandemic, we had bonded over this position that we were often positioned as futurists, but neither of us really felt like we were futurists, right? We were a little bit skeptical of this kind of 50-year time horizon. The technology is going to save us and kill us, right? Depending on.
And it's really fast, so you don't know what will happen like in 2 days, for sure, not in 55 years or something.
Exactly. And so we were talking about, this different positioning that we felt we had. And I can't quite remember how, but we agreed to write a book together, basically. And this was very interesting. So we spent the last 3 years working, never meeting actually until we launched it in the US last month, never meeting again. But we spent 3 years basically interviewing some of the most inspiring, most cutting edge entrepreneurs, organizations, people who are really creating the future. And what we tried to do with the book is really two things which we felt were a little bit different. And one of them is, the clue is in the title, The Future Normal, because as I said, we felt like we were reluctant futurists because we felt like everyone asks about what the future could be. And not enough people really take a look back and say, okay, but what do we want it to become totally mainstream, right? How do we build a better future for the masses rather than just the kind of the upper end, the wealthy, the affluent, whatever it is, right? The small niche demographics. And the other thing is, especially, as we discussed during the pandemic, there's a lot of negativity. And actually, this has really continued. If you look at some of the conversation around AI, now, even today, there's a lot of negativity around the future now, a lot of dystopian thinking. And you see this in popular culture. You look at sci-fi movies.
People are afraid, actually, and that's why they're negative.
Yeah, and we are not naively optimistic. There's some really important data. We've done some work with Ipsos, who go out there and study, and they actually now found in the last few years that actually a majority of people fear they will no longer be better off than their parents, which is a huge shift, right? If you think about economically, for the last 100 years, basically, we have been on a trajectory of progress, and certainly in the West, which is a horrible term, right? But the kind of the US and Europe and more societies like this, people are losing this confidence in the future, and so we thought this was a really important thing to try and address, because the other thing that we believe is, you will only create the future you can imagine. And we feel incredibly privileged that through the course of the previous 10 plus years, we've both been working in this industry. Our job is really focused on, as I say, the inspiring entrepreneurs that are creating new products, services that actually could change the world for the better. And so we also wanted to ask this question, what if everything went right? And what if some of these new technologies or new products could actually come and start to become more widespread, become normal. And so the book is really a whistle-stop tour, and we've done a few other things with the book, which I think are quite interesting. Like you said, you'd read the book, but I'm guessing, and we had a small chat on this before.
Yeah.
No one reads it from A to Z, right? Because
Right. And even if you can see the title of this podcast, I selected only one part of 3 or 4 parts in the book. I think three, if I'm not mistaken, right?
yeah.
So I took only one part out of it, which was more like it's resonated with me better. So that's why I decided this one.
Yeah. And so the book is 30 short chapters, typically 7 to 10 pages with a big idea, but also each chapter highlights an instigator, what we call an instigator. So it could be an individual, could be a new startup, or it could be a new organization, which is already living the trend, which is already showing how it might be here today.
Right.
And then a few questions that ask, okay, what would happen if this was to become more normal, more widespread? And so what we're trying to do is to say, look, I mean, part of this is just the reality. We know that business people and everyone watching this will feel it. You no longer have time to read 300 pages from start to finish. That's not the way the world works.
Yeah.
But also, it's this idea of being able to dip in and dip out and say, actually, there's a piece of inspiration that I can take from this adjacent sector, which maybe is a way of seeing the world that I hadn't otherwise thought of today, but I can now see it is here in one context. And what might it look, how might that translate if it comes to my sector, if it comes to my market? And this is something that, myself and Rohit have always done very intuitively. His previous books were the non-obvious trend series. So it's really just trying to give people, a sideways look at things they may have heard about, but to give them, deeper insights about how, and the reason why we are talking, how can you use those insights to ultimately launch innovations in your own business? Because
Right.
of course, we think this stuff is interesting. It's but it has to be useful. It has to be actionable as well.
Yeah, and tell us about the other 2 parts. So I selected the part about connecting and thriving in the future and the relationships and the way that people relate to each other. But tell us about the other parts that I did not relate to.
Yeah, well, we go through from a very personal focus, as you said, how we connect, how we thrive. Both of our backgrounds are in consumerism and consumer trends and how people live and work. So we have a section on that, how we live, work, and consume. And then also we took the opportunity to, in the final section, to look a bigger picture at how humanity might survive and some of the bigger structural changes that might be required or could be around the corner, which, as I said, on a much more systemic level could really change the systems in which we live. And so, it depends on your horizon and what you're thinking about, but it was just an amazing experience to speak to some of these people. And I'm sure we'll discuss some of these entrepreneurs that are, building the most incredible businesses, organizations that actually get you quite excited as a reader. And ultimately, as we said, we're constantly trying to ask the question, how can you use this insight yourself? Because it's not just about the businesses that we feature. And, there's always a moment where we finish the book and we're praying that none of the companies that we featured has a big blow up before we come to publication. But I think, one of the things we always try and do is to say, this company in and of itself, of course, we're trying to pick ones that go on to do great things. But actually, it's the lessons you can learn from what these organizations are doing that have a bigger implication on the wider world of business, society, and individuals and people.
Yeah. I think that in many cases, people are thinking about what could we do? And as you mentioned, the question is actually what should we do? What should be our future and where we aim for as people, as humanity even. And I like the fact that it's not only, wow, this is the technology, this is what's going to be. Really, what we want to achieve is a very, very important question. And I want to start with something that I'm creating a course about AI products right now. And I'm always like, each day I have additional things to say about it, and it's so fast. And one of the things that I thought about is about deep fake and the fake era. And we start to see that even in the elections in the US, you already have this into the campaigns. So how could we be our real authentic selves online and offline in the future when we have these capabilities?
Yeah. Um, so I think there's two parts to your question there, which is one around the authentic self and one around the trusting of information. And
Right.
so to take them in turn, actually, one of the ideas we explore in the book is that uh, our identities in online worlds maybe don't have to be so authentic, right? And actually, part of the opportunity of the digital space is it allows people to experiment. And so there we look at a platform called Ready Player Me, where you can create this avatar and it can be portable from platform to platform. And of course, the metaverse was the big trend, last year and for a couple of years before while we were writing the book. But we're actually, when we think about the future, and of course, as an author in this space, you're very mindful of, to your point about AI, the pace of change. And when you're writing words, on one day, people will not be reading them for a few years potentially. And underlying our view of the future, as we say, is this focus on what should be the normal as well. So actually, when we think about how society and how identity and how our experience of these online worlds are changing over time, we're also always asking ourselves what will not change, right? And this idea of basic human needs and thinking about how does technology enable us to do the things that will still be relevant in a few years. That was always something that we really interrogate very in a very focused way. So that's part of it around the online identity piece. We actually took a different view and said, and my view is actually one of the big misconceptions around the metaverse was, that it was going to be this replica of the physical world, and it would just be an alternative space, where we would behave similarly, because I think that is not how we think of digital spaces. As I say, they are more fluid, they are more experimental. You can do things in digital worlds that you can't do in the real world. And if they try and compete on a like-for-like basis, why would you do that, right, as an individual? Because the real world is richer. So that's one part. Then the second part of your question about the deep fakes, right, and the pace of AI. Again, I think it's fascinating you brought that up, because when we wrote the chapter on, we have a chapter on what we call certified media, and it was the question we asked at the start of that chapter was, what if you could trust the content that you consume online? And exactly as you say, when we started that chapter, it was at the tail end of the Trump era, right, and it was very politically focused. Of course, what's happened now is in the current era, it's maybe much more social, right? And we've seen now these tools really democratized beyond even where they were a few years ago.
Sure.
And we've all seen. I mean, I'm sitting here in London. I woke up this morning after the coronation, and a friend sent me all of these photos of, in the style of Wes Anderson, the royal family partying after the coronation, right? And these super realistic, like incredible, and obviously fake, but those are the fun examples. But we've all seen the examples of Trump being arrested violently by the the New York Police Department, the Pope famously wearing his big
the white coat. Yeah,
exactly. So, but again, it's this idea. When we started looking at this question, it actually came from the idea that what is important to society in the future. And there's a great book by Francis Fukuyama who wrote The End of History, which was all about trust and how trust fundamentally is the bedrock of any functioning society, right?
Right.
Whatever economic system you put in place, but especially in a capitalistic system, you have to have this ability to trust, people at scale, in order to have a functioning society of any kind of meaningful productivity. And that is going to be, whether it's synthetic media or Midjourney or whatever the technological platform is kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant for that specific moment in time. The more relevant question is, what is really important to us as a collection of individuals, as a society going forward, that will still be relevant? And so that's really how we chose what to write about in the book, was to think about, yes, all of the examples that we feature are of the moment, but the bigger questions, what does it mean to trust the content we come across online? They will be relevant for the next 10 years.
Yeah. The reason that I put the same, like two topics in the same question, because that I could be anyone that I want, right? I could just wear the facade or someone or templates of others people's face and their expression, of course, their voice, and I can act as whoever I want. I know, Kim Kardashian, whoever I want. And once you are talking to me in the digital space, you don't know that I'm not her, or
Mm.
you just assume that she won't be there. But the fact that it's not a real thing, and the fact that it's not really me in the real world, could be either me expressing things that I cannot express during my daily life because I'm not doing that. And the second one could be I don't feel authentic because I feel obligated to be different, or
Mm.
to present myself differently when I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating moment in time, and two observations. I was at a talk in the South by Southwest conference where we launched the book last month, and I thought one of the funniest insights I heard of a whole presentation was someone saying, there's this, as you say, there are all these filters, right? And you use the example of becoming Kim Kardashian, but even like Zoom now is less aggressive than that. But they have this kind of, now by default, it will make you a little bit more beautiful than you are
Yeah.
used to. And this commentator said, I don't want this. I don't want to turn up in real life and everyone be disappointed, right? I want to have
Yeah.
the ugly filter. So when I turn up, everyone's like, wow, you're so attractive.
Yeah,
So I
like
think
it's like in TV, it gets you fat in a few pounds, right? And then you come in and wow, you're much thinner, which is like much better, right?
exactly right. Or you're taller. You always hear people meet famous people and they go, oh,
Yeah,
you're so small, right? Like this gap between expectations and reality, if we're not
yeah,
careful, we will not play to our actual advantage in the real world. So I thought that was very funny. And actually almost the bigger insight there around expectations and your point about truth. Everyone's saying, oh, AI and the synthetic media, deep fakes, will destroy trust in society, right? And
mhm,
I'm a little bit more optimistic than that, because my argument for optimism is that we have been here before, in the sense that we are just of the generation because we've grown up. When you see a photo or a video, for the whole of our lives, we've basically been able to assume that more or less it is real, because it was very hard to fake. I mean, not exclusively, maybe, high-end politics, etc. But like 99% of the visual imagery that we see was what it was, because, it was too difficult to fake. I don't think our children will have this expectation at all, right? In the same way that if you think about when the printing press came along, historically, I was talking with a friend and we were saying, isn't it crazy that people used to trust signatures? There was really no like, anyone could sign something, but we just had this kind of cultural system that said, if something was signed, it was. But
yeah,
before the printing press, if you saw something written down, you would kind of largely assume that it was real, and then you could print anything. You had no knowledge; it was just type. If someone wrote something, you had no knowledge that they'd actually said it. And we would rely on the mass media and cultural institutions to get
yeah,
our news sources, our trusted news sources, from specific places, right? Because if I suddenly wrote, the King of England has decided we're now a republic and he's abdicated, you wouldn't believe it, right? You would say, okay, Henry's written it, or Henry's claiming this is written by, King Charles. How do I know? And so I think we are just in a moment where we are a little out of sync, if you like, with the technological capabilities and the reality. And I think, very, very quickly, we will just assume that things are fake unless we hear, unless we see that they are verified by a trusted source. And that is
yeah.
kind of already beginning to happen, I believe, online. There are a lot of people tackling this problem of either technologically, or culturally, how can we verify this information?
Yeah, I agree that in the future our kids will be much more, and I wouldn't say smarter, but they would be smarter for their era, and they would see things differently. And I think that as I see the last like few years, especially with AI right now, is the fact that once you ask questions, and reality could be many things, you could open your mind to so many other possibilities than this is what you should do, this is what the media is telling you, that's the truth. It's not related only to the fact, do I believe and trust the media or trust people who write it? Is what is reality? How do I create things in reality? Do I have to go through a dogma that says this is how it is or not?
Hmm.
And then it enables people to think for themselves, because they want to really know, is it true for me? Is it authentic for me when I have this kind of content in front of me?
Yeah.
Okay, so could you tell us about, we're talking about trends, so give us like a few main trends that you discuss in the book.
Oh, well, where do we start? I mean, as I said up front,
Your favorites. Let's start with your favorite trends.
exactly. There are 30 chapters in the book. So, but I think that the chapters that I'm most excited about or most proud about, if you like, are the ones where I think, and as I said earlier, Rohit's previous books were called the Non-Obvious Trend series. So ones where we're able to take a topic that many people will be familiar with, but give it a new spin and a new insight that maybe they haven't thought about. These are my favorite chapters. So one that I really enjoy talking to people about, because I think it challenges so many of our base assumptions, is the rise of the chapter is called Unnaturally Better, and it looks at the rise of kind of synthetic biology and to create products that are more sustainable and more ethical. So often in food and fashion, but there are examples in other parts of the consumer arena as well. But you think about, so this is cultivated meat and lab grown diamonds and all of these things, right, which many of your listeners will be aware exist. One of the things we did is when we looked at this and we were talking, we said this is actually really interesting, because if you think about the last 40 or 50 years, let's say, from a rise of Whole Foods, and you think about the artisan fashion houses of Italy, right? Natural is the status symbol. We intuitively believe that synthetic is lower quality, right? In terms, it lasts forever. It's often fossil fuel based, right? It's become, no one celebrates how synthetic their products are these days. But actually, that could be about to fundamentally change, because, as I said, if you think about meat, lab grown meat potentially is cleaner. The supply chain is infinitely shorter. Less disease, less issues with worker rights, etc., right? Environmental footprint is much lower. As you say, think about lab grown diamonds. Think about this as lab grown leather. All of these synthetic products. And what does it do to, if you like, our perception of value, right? Our perception of, and ultimately our search for status, if actually the natural product, starts to become the one that we kind of instinctively go, oh wow, I can't believe you're kind of doing that.
Like
so I think
fur.
that's
like
a really
we had that with fur.
Of course,
fur, the same thing.
Yeah.
People was like in like I can tell that my grandmother came from Romania a few years back to Israel, and she had a few leather coats. And I have to say, first, what would she do with them in Israel? That's a good question. The second would be like, really? This is what you have? And I remember myself as a kid, I really always loved animals. And today it's like something that is very close to my heart. And now it's like unconceivable. Like, what? I don't know who buys fur, right?
No, but I think one of the really interesting thing just on that specifically is a lot of the the vegan leathers and the vegan furs. Most of them, if you dig into it, are just actually plastic based essentially, right? So they're fossil fuel based. So there's a lot of conversation amongst environmentalists that actually is kind of the worst thing, right? They might be ethically better, and so I think there is a huge opportunity, if you like, and another chapter we have in a similar vein is this idea of guilt-free indulgences. And I think in terms of innovation, for any listeners, thinking about changing people's behavior is very hard, as we know. And
sure.
we know that many of the decisions we make, whether it's flying, whether it's eating, the things we buy, there is if we really think about it, they are not great, right? For either for ourselves, for the planet, or for society, right? The wages in the supply chain, etc. And I think the businesses over the next decade, which really can allow us to, if you like, maintain some of this indulgence, because we like flying and we like visiting new places and we like connecting with people. We of course we're human, but taking some of the guilt out, I think that's a huge opportunity for people. So to your bigger question, I really enjoy the chapters where we are able to take things that people are thinking about, or maybe things that people haven't thought about, and say, yeah, there is an interesting insight here, which is actually in this case we're talking really about the transformation of the marketing industry and the branding industry and about what people value that is much bigger than just cultivated meat itself. So yeah, I think that's something that we're always trying to do, is to help people join the dots, but and take value from things which they maybe just see in the newspaper and otherwise would overlook.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the future of education. How will our kids and their kids learn, and how would it be different from our education?
I mean, it's a huge question, right? And I think
Yeah.
there's almost two ways I would answer this. I would say, there is the optimist in me, which would say there is so many exciting developments coming down the track. And then, of course, the in some senses, the painful realist who says, actually, we can be naively optimistic, and the reality is most people, will
Yeah.
still choose mindless entertainment. And so this is a question that we ask in the book, and that's we're one of the people we look at is in this chapter we have on stealth learning, which is we feature Roblox in there, and how increasingly video games are becoming sources of learning. But we also discuss in that chapter the prevalence of learning on TikTok, right? And it is something that I'm fascinated about, in terms of how we've moved from if you like, having to read about something in a book, which is very static, kind of very one-dimensional, to the increasing immersion and personalization of the learning experience, and how, as I say, yeah, that can be increasingly stealth. People can learn without even realizing they're learning. And I think, even since we published the book, the Khan Academy and
Yeah, I saw that.
their release, looking at their AI chatbot bot
Yeah.
CanMigo. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things which is most interesting about that, and the bit that jumped out to me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, was the idea of being able to tie any learning topic back to something that the student was interested in. And I was talking to a teacher friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he's saying, of course, this is what all teachers do, is they say, okay, you want to become an athlete, is the example he uses in the TED Talk. Here's why nutrition is really important to you, right? You might not think you like biology and school and nutrition, but trust me, it's really, really important for actually what you are interested in, which is becoming, a sportsman. But of course, we haven't been able to do that at scale, for millions of people. So I think that combination of embedding learning into activities that people are already doing, be it social media, video games, etc., and then personalizing it is really exciting. It's a huge, exciting opportunity. Whether it will be the reality for everyone, I'm kind of a realist. Of course, we'll sit there mindlessly scrolling on TikTok too, but
Of course. I would say that as I see it, I think a lot about education, and it's one of the first things that I wanted to talk to you, because I think about my kids, which is so natural, right? And I see that the way they perceive the world, the way that they learn, is so much more fun than what I had, right? And the topics they could really go into and learn to details are so much more, like there are so many other ways to learn, and each detail that you can find could open another door and another door, and then you could just focus on something that is interesting for you. And what you said about the video about Khan Academy with their cooperation with OpenAI, I think, is the fact that you could be personal. Because one kid would like to learn something which is related to, I know, to Messi, and other one would like dinosaurs. It doesn't matter what the content is, because what they need to learn, let's say, is, I know, to write an essay. They need to learn how to express themselves. They need to learn how to go from one idea to the other, which is really learning. And what we have, I think it's not only in Israel, you can see it all around, is like texts which are not relevant for them. They're not interested. And you need to really make them learn it. And they suffer there and going to school, sitting all the time, right? Like, I know, 7 hours sitting for kids who are kind of energetic and they want to explore the world. and they want to be attached to what's going on in their mind, and not something that we just stuff in their mind. It's okay, this is how you learn, this is what you should know. And more than that, do we really know what they should know? Do we really know what are the topics that would take them to the future other than handling change? I don't know. I don't know. Like in the past, I always told my kids, you have to know at least English. But now it might not be relevant because changing from one language to the other might be kind of simple, right? So,
Yeah.
what do they really need to know? That's a very interesting question. And from there, how could you do what you need to do as an educator, as a mother, as someone who prepares them for that future?
Yeah, and I think you've nailed it. And I get the exact quote, maybe not 100% right, but Alvin Toffler wrote about this in The Future Shock, right? And he, whatever it was, 50 years ago, where he said, the most important skill of the 21st century will be the ability to learn and unlearn, because, the only constant will be change. And this is, it's a cliche, but in that sense, predicting the future in that context is easy, if you like, because we, on some level, we know the trajectory, maybe parking the risk of existential threat from AI, but we broadly know where things are going, headed. I think one of the things we try and do in the book, again and again, is to give people not just the skills, but really the mindset of how to look at what is happening today and use that to draw intelligent conclusions about future opportunities, not necessarily what the future will be, but about how you might prepare for it. And that's what I always say to people, as a futurist, it's not our job to predict the future, or reluctant futurist, as I said at the beginning. It's not our job to predict the future. It's to help you ask better questions about what your futures could be. And that is a big difference in whether you're talking to a corporate client in that context, or whether you're talking to your child. If you like, the aspiration there is the same, to ultimately to empower people. And I think this is what great entrepreneurs have always done very intuitively. They look at what is happening in one context and say, okay, if I tweak this, and this now applies in a different context. And there is everything is a remix.
Yeah, I think that in general, maybe we underestimate the ability just to imagine, because once everything is so tangible in front of you, you daydream less because something is always in front of you. And if you're like an introvert, and you think to yourself, it's not considered, like it's better to be extrovert and charismatic, whatever. And as people, we need that time. When I was a young girl, I guess that some people would remember that when we went to our friends, we would wait for them, and they would go down from their building, and we would wait downstairs until they came. It could take even 10 minutes, and you wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't do anything. You would just stand and stare and be with yourself, right? And it's like, wow, what an idea. Today you cannot see people, even me, when I'm going, like I'm doing things in between. I'm not having like my own spare time. And we need that, like, and when I read books, so sometimes I have that, which is another way of thinking, but sometimes because it's more, I would say, you can take your time and you could read something and think about it. And that's why I love reading books. And when I read your book, I had this like, okay, I'm thinking about it. Okay. And what you're saying is really imagination. And kids have lots of imagination. They just need to know how to use it and to implement that in their future. And if they're optimistic, I think that's the most important part, right? Other than that, we can never know what's going to be the future, right?
No, I mean, and that, as I said, that is, we are not in the business of predicting the future. Although we were laughing, of course, if we do a good job, the book will kind of seem nonsensical in a few years, because everything that we write about will become so normal. You will look back and say, why were we even writing about it? And actually, we had this conversation that, I introduced the story of the book at the beginning by saying, we'd only met for 20 minutes, and then we collaborated, transatlantically and purely by Zoom, etc. Now, for someone a generation behind, that would be inconceivable that you could write a book, of someone that you've only met once. but for now, it's totally normal. It's a mildly interesting aside, but there's nothing truly remarkable about that. You're not sitting there going, wow, I can't believe you did this, right? It's like, okay, it's interesting, but that has become part of our normal. We both have had read enough of each other's content online over the previous 10 years that we were confident we were aligned, and the mechanics of working together. The production assistant was in France. The editor was in between Argentina and San Francisco. It's not even remarkable that we would do this. So I think there is this kind of this paradox, if you like, with the business that we are in that the more successful you are, that in a way, the worse you look, because very quickly people find it not interesting what you're writing about. So it's a very interesting space to write about.
Yeah, in general, thinking about the future, and then the future comes, and then it's like, okay, so what's the next future, right? So another thing that I want to talk to you is about loneliness. We know that people are separated, and everyone is in their home, in their office, in their car, in their screen, in their feed. Everybody is like inside himself, isolated from the outside world. And how do you see the future of that, and in general, mental health in the future?
Yeah, again, you're totally right. And going back to our conversation earlier about how did we know what to include in the book, and it's thinking about the questions which will still be relevant in 5-10 years time, and exactly as you say, loneliness and our social connections and our desire for social connection and personal meaning are just so fundamental. But also I think that's a really interesting topic to think about, because in the book we have 2 chapters that kind of really address this head on. I mean, one literally is called Ending Loneliness, and actually there the featured instigator that we profile is a social housing block in Sweden. And what it is there is it's actually a decidedly non-technological innovation. And of course, so often we're writing about technology, but actually what this block of flats does, this block of apartments, is it is a socially constructed mix of cross-generational residents. So there is 10% unaccompanied refugees who are younger, then another 40% who are just low-income local people, and then 50% are over 70s. And so we've really deliberately constructed this mix. And they have some really interesting small quirks, like in the contract for renting one of these apartments. And they say, look, it's not like we're monitoring it with a time clock and kicking people out, but you have to agree to socialize essentially with your neighbors for a 1 hour, I think it's a week or a month. But to kind of help nudge this, they actually don't have Wi-Fi in the rooms, right? So you have Wi-Fi in the common areas, and of course you can get a phone. But if you want high-speed internet, you kind of have to come out into the social shared communal areas. And so that's just a really interesting way. And again, in the chapter, we look at a whole bunch of other examples of how people are addressing this issue, because exactly as you say, we often think of loneliness as being something that elderly people, suffer from in later years. But actually, a lot of the data shows that it truly is a kind of a universal of the modern human condition. And actually, Gen Z, etc., Gen Alpha, while they're superficially, digitally hyper-connected, actually they have, experienced the same, if not even higher, feelings of loneliness as well. So there is, clearly a big global human need for this. And we profile there's and again an amazing apartment block in Singapore, where again they have a kindergarten kind of daycare center next to the old people's home, and so really trying to increase the frequency of intergenerational collisions. And there's a lot actually in the book around how we will live in the urban fabric, and how, as I say, around bringing nature into cities as well, because it's one of the things that we're both deeply interested in, is that technology on the one hand does so much for us, and capitalism does so much for us, but many of the if you like the metrics of quality of life appear, as we started our discussion, saying that they're heading in the wrong direction actually, and that is not just about the apps we have on our phone, or a few small changes here and then. It's really about how we live and work as individuals, but also as collective millions of people in the cities that we live in around the world. You're sitting just outside Tel Aviv, north of Tel Aviv. I'm in London. Rohit, my co-author, is just outside Washington, and we share more in common than we have differences.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in context of medicine, but not only when you talk about urbanization and cities and the fact that we'll be back to nature, or we need more nature than what we have right now. And I think that in some cases, when you're going to one direction, there is this impact of going all the way to the other direction in order to balance that. And one of the things that I find in my own life and in general, the fact that you go out, just going out of this box, you see, that's my backyard. And I think it's so important to go into nature. And sometimes people think about, yeah, it's fresh air, or yeah, I see the sunlight, but it's much more than what we perceive as the nature. There are so many other aspects to it as us as a human being. You're part of another animal that needs to be outside. And it's clearly an impact that I see right now more, and we would see more. People would need that, the connection of outside of the nature.
People do need that, but as we say in the book, we look at the in the chapter where we look at what we call green prescriptions. We look at actually the UK public health system, which partly because of financial reasons, cost pressures, are really looking into non-pharmacological interventions, right? And so social prescribing, as you say, nature prescribing, getting people outside. It has, of course, the benefit that it's cheaper, right? Arguably than as I said, pharmaceutical interventions. But as you identified, there's also this fascinating duality that, yes, we're moving forward at 100 miles an hour in many spaces of our lives, but also in many others, we kind of have this innate understanding that sometimes the old ways can be just as valuable, if not more valuable. As you say, getting back to nature, I think the challenge is always, especially in the kind of the capitalistic system that we both live in, and most people in the world live in, is what are the metrics? What are the incentives? How do we know what works? And historically, or certainly for the last generation, we've prioritized one way of solving problems. But again, that was the great privilege of the book, was to be able to cast a wide net and saying who is taking different approaches to solving these problems, sometimes counterintuitive approaches, sometimes unconventional ones, and where are they having some success, and what might it look like if those scaled?
Right. So we're almost out of time, and I'm thinking about what would be my last questions, but I would go for one. If I would ask for one tip for people who want to understand the future, leaders, entrepreneurs today, what must they know?
I think it really comes down to this central idea that I've mentioned a couple of times, which is, people often get very intimidated about thinking about the future because it feels somehow unknowable or mystical. We think about popular culture, it's all about exactly literally that, the mysticism of soothsayers, right back to prehistoric times. Our big idea, if you like, is to think about, you can start to see glimpses of the future by looking at what is happening today and thinking about how you can adapt them, and specifically, how will you think about how to adapt them into your context? Yes, we're surrounded by change, but we're also surrounded by things that don't change. And as we've discussed, that's this idea of human nature, the desire for trust, the desire for connection, the desire for say like well-being, and to improve ourselves, to educate ourselves, to be better versions of the people we want to be. There is a reason why great literature echoes through the millennia, right? We still read, things that were written to 5,000 years ago, because they speak to an eternal element of the human condition. And so I think when you're thinking about how to predict the future, don't be intimidated. Start to look at things that are happening today, but look at them through this lens of basic human needs and wants that will still be around in a decade. And then that will give you, if you like, the foundations, the anchors that you can think about, okay, this part will change, but this part will stay the same.
Yeah, I totally agree. What you're saying resonates with me when I think about looking in the future in an open-minded, curious way. and not like being afraid of it. Once you're afraid, you're like, you're looking like, how do you call the horses? What do they have? I
Yeah.
don't remember. The blinders? I don't know what it's
Yeah,
called.
blinders, blinkers, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So instead of like really seeing the full potential, you're afraid of it and you cannot really see what could it be. And I really agree with what you're saying. This is what I think when I think about it. So where could people hear more about you and read the book and contact you?
Yeah, so as you might expect, the book is available on Amazon and all good bookstores in the US primarily at the moment, but launching globally. We've got a couple of really exciting international expansions coming up, and then LinkedIn. I'm very active on there, so please do connect with me. Would love to hear what people think and be challenged, and also learn what should we be writing about for the next book as well. Who are the
What's the next
instigators?
one?
Well, just the beauty of writing what we write is it's forever changing. So yes,
Right.
we have our foundational anchors that we're interested in: loneliness, trust, all the things we've discussed. But who is really changing the game in these spaces? Who is raising our expectations around what's coming next? What is possible? That's what I love to learn about
Wow.
myself.
Wow. Thanks, Henry, for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. So
Thanks.
I'm really happy that we have the possibility to talk and to have time just to discuss and think together. Everything today is so fast. Just having a discussion from the beginning to the end, 46 minutes is like, wow. I'm so thank you for that possibility. I'm so thankful for that. So thanks, Henry.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
Sure. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya. I'm Mazor Kario, and you've been listening to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, invincibleinnovation.com, where you can learn more about our programs and my book, Innovating Through Chaos. I'll be waiting for you next week in our next episode. Thank you for listening.